Yeah, we all come face to face, unfortunately, with grief at some point in our lives. It is probably inevitable, but I think the experience has never been more communally felt at the moment. And I think because we are so affected and connected through this COVID-19 pandemic, well, this morning, our good friend and registered counsellor, Chanel Morris, joins us on the couch to share some tips on how to carry ourselves through grief, in particular when it comes to helping a young person, one of our children, or maybe someone else's child, to deal with grief. This is something that you don't ever want to broach, but I suppose it's an inevitable part of life. And in our previous discussions, we've touched on the idea of the 5 stages or steps of grieving. What are those?
Yeah, the 5 steps, the first one is denial. So you don't want to admit that the person's gone. The second one is going to be anger, because you become angry with why, the why question, why is this happening? And then you have your bargaining. I'll do anything, please. For children, it means they'll be good. I'll be good. I'll do better at school. And then is your depression, when you realize when it sinks in, you know, that low, and it'll affect adults and children differently. And then the last phase is acceptance. That's your 5th step.
How then do we, as someone who, because I suppose we've been affected by grief and on so many different levels over this pandemic, that it's given us an opportunity to really examine ourselves and examine that process. We've lost things, and there is a grieving process in that, but I think it really comes to a peak when you lose someone. How do you approach someone who is in the throes of those 5 steps of grieving? Maybe when it's at its freshest, how do we empathetically connect with someone like that?
So that's a difficult one, because a lot of people are so uncomfortable with death.
Yeah.
They themselves have never experienced it or haven't coped with the loss of someone they loved. So when they are facing the person who's grieving, they often just repeat platitudes, you know, and that often angers the person who's grieving. And what we can do is, sometimes, you know, they're not thinking. I remember people bringing us food when my mom died. For those things. Helping with school runs if there's kids, grocery shopping.
Maybe get practical.
Do you know what I'm trying to say? Or just sit and let them cry, you know? For you to be able to sit with someone else's pain, I do it for a living.
Yeah.
But for the other people, it's really hard. Just sit and let them sob or cry. No talking. Do you know what I'm trying to say? That is actually such a rare thing to give someone who's experienced loss.
Because ultimately, there's nothing you can say that's going to make it better, and you've got to accept that. And I think it's, you know, the sooner you understand that maybe it's just a case of just getting in there, going into that space, as you say, with them. How do we approach this then with a child, in the unspeakable horror of a child losing a parent, which happens daily? So it's something we have to think about. How then do you help a child manage that process?
I think that often, depending on the age of the child, so if you've got various age kids who've lost a parent, you cannot tell them all together, because you need to have different conversations at the level of where they are. The younger kids wouldn't fully comprehend. They still think the person will come back. And the older child may shout or get upset with the younger child, who then insists. So you do it separately. And it's also about just allowing them to go through the stages of grief as well. It's not an adult thing. It's not reserved for us only.
It's an emotional thing.
They go through it as well, and they don't understand it. Okay, we don't someone, but for them it's even worse. Yeah.
With a child that is maybe at that stage where they're expected to then reintegrate into life, and they are struggling to relate to their peers, struggling to reconnect with their own social, settle their normal, so-called normal life. How do you help them transition back into that, in that phase? You would hope that you can get to a point where they can then, as you say, that final step, find acceptance.
Yeah, no, life does go on in terms of you have to go back to school and do everything like normal. But when the child goes back into that peer setting, they don't feel the same. They've actually lost a piece of their childhood. They are more, they don't feel the world is safe anymore. They wonder about their own health. Will I go next, or is it my fault? You know, or then they worry about the surviving parent, you know. And so these are all the fears and anxieties, and the other little friend next to you is just worrying about, oh, peanut butter on my lunch again. And the other one is thinking all those, you know, anxious thoughts, fearful thoughts.
Now that you've slammed every poor mother that's given their child peanut butter this morning, thanks for that. You know, I keep thinking, is this then your script for the rest of your life as a child if you go through this? Or is there, how important is it to address the grief and make sure that it's processed at that point so it doesn't become the script for that child's life throughout their life, that they keep going, because trauma stays with us.
Yeah.
And if you don't deal with it, I mean, we're all dealing with it in our generation, certainly with some trauma from our past. So how do you prevent that cycle repeating?
I think that, you know, a lot of it, how we as the adults around children cope with our grief over the loss of the same person plays a huge role in that, because sometimes kids see our sadness and they don't want to add to it, so they hide their own. They don't want to burden us with more emotion, so they actually suppress it. So our job is to take note and see any changes in our kids' behaviors, eating, sleeping, you know, regressive behaviors, like if your child started, you know, sleeping through the night but doesn't now. No more bedwetting, starts bedwetting. Academically, schools suffer. Those are all the signs. But you need to help them by letting them talk about the loved one they've lost.
You've got to be able to talk about it to aid
That's the
them.
challenge. And look at photos and relive and possessions. So often people, they just want to clear everything out. They can't stand to look at all the possessions. But that child may want something special of that parent, but isn't ready yet to choose it.
Well, I mean, we heard of this beautiful story. I think it was a Minecraft or a game like that, where a sibling who had lost a younger sister discovered a digital world that had been created by her sister, and was able to go into that every day and pick up the nuances of what her sister had created.
Yeah.
And it created this digital footprint. Facebook, platforms like that keep reminding us of people that we've lost. And it's an opportunity, I suppose, to reconnect with them in the best moments, best memories.
Yeah.
So I certainly reiterate, very difficult one to cover in such a short amount of time, I know, but thank you so much. I think I think the opportunity, you know, to use that word in a very, I suppose, what would seem out of context, but the opportunity is that we have an opportunity ourselves to grow through that grieving process with the person who is suffering. But ultimately, don't expect them to change. Just go in there with an open mind. And as Shana said, maybe all that person needs, whether they're a child or a grown-up, is someone to just cry with them and sit in that pain. Suffering is a common human experience, and it's something that we can't avoid, but we can certainly all develop our empathy and get through it.